going to be discussing the FDA, how that relates to the Texas hemp industry and what's really going on at the national level. And so with that, Sol and Jessica, if y'all want to introduce yourself, and I'll start with Sol. Give us a little bit about your background and understanding of what's going on with the FDA currently.
Sure. My background is about 18 years of experience in industry around industrial toxicology, and that includes also products in the food, pharma, and cosmetic markets. I've worked with consumer products with a large oil and gas company for a while, and then I also worked for a chemical distributor that sold into food and pharma and cosmetic markets. So with that, have taken interest also in providing regulatory support for the EPA and FDA for the cannabidiol market and hemp generally. I'm honored to be also chairing workshops in the spring with American Association of Advancement of Science and Society of Toxicology. Have a paper here, so just glad to be part of the conference here today and discuss. And I've got a lot of regulatory experience on, what are the requirements as well as managing FDA rules. As you're probably aware, with the MORE Act at least passing Congress, and then we'll all see what happens in 2021 with the Senate and legislation. But changes are coming, and changes to this kind of situationship, I think, is this article in the that's been out here about since 2018 that's been operating to have great growth, but also this gray area between states and federal. I think that's changing, and hopefully this discussion today helps you understand those changes, how to be prepared to maintain leadership, and hopefully out of too many regulatory issues for your market. So I look forward to you moderating and also learning from Jessica, and thank you for being here today.
Jessica?
Good morning. I am Jessica Arendt. I am the Chief Compliance Officer for a brand and private manufacturing company known as Cannabidiol Life. We are wholly hemp LLC. I came from the tequila industry. I was the golden girl in tequila, on the rise, regulation, marketing, distribution around the world. And I was sitting at a stop sign one day when somebody driving 85 miles an hour hit me, and I put my entire face right through the steering column. Broke every tooth in my head, broke most of the bones in my face. 10 months later, my husband was begging me to get up off the couch after self-medicating on cannabis, because I'm a natural. Begged me to get off the couch, and I went to work for one of the biggest manufacturers in this industry. It took me 89 days to wake up and understand that they were breaking every conceivable law in manufacturing, agriculture, and consumer services. And that was just the start. I went out that front door with a mission to make it regulatory and compliant, to fight every bathtub manufacturer, every lying COA, to ensure that we could have this as a free choice in every store conceivably for our choice, for our body. I believe in my body, my choice, and natural medicine.
Very good. Could each of y'all kind of talk on just kind of a high-level overview of some of the do's and don'ts as it relates to the FDA and how that's specific to the hemp industry as it relates to claims, as it relates to different facilities. So just kind of that high level, what should people be looking out for most as they start to address falling in compliance with the FDA in their facilities and products?
Sure, I can start. When I started in this industry with that fun little company, that was 6 years ago. Nobody knew what CBD was. We weren't talking about hemp, and it was still a stigma. The FDA was just beginning to step in and be aware of what was going on in the industry, but from our perspective, it was more of a high-level perception, similar to that of oversight of vitamins that you find in GNC, which is also kind of a no-no for the FDA. Over the course of the last 6 years, we have seen them grow increasingly interested to the point where we got to last year, and last November, 15 warning letters were issued to 15 different companies for breaking a myriad of regulatory standards. That included making claims. Those claims came from testimonials. A lot of those brands went, well, wait a minute, I didn't have anything to do with that. That person said that's what that did. But the FDA said, listen, we don't have the studies. We don't have anything that verifies that this is actually true. You got to get 1,000 people, do the study, and then if you get, 99% return, then we can say, okay. The FDA has been very active in controlling or trying to control us because for the same reasons, safety and protocols, regulation, et cetera, because at the end of the day, it's going into somebody you care about. This year, the FDA no longer gives you that 30-day window to make those corrections. Now, the FDA simply says, you've got about 48 to 72 hours or we're going to wipe you out. That's where we sit.
Yeah, so, if you look up, FDA definition of what's a drug, a cosmetic, or a soap, that's a very good guide that's free out there to say, here's what you can and can't say, here's what you can put in marketing materials. And, as things change and work, if you have, feedback or get to a goal, there's different paths you can think about. If you're thinking about an active ingredient with over-the-counter markets and you want to focus on that, there's a pathway for the over-the-counter or OTC monograph. For cosmetics, you have the requirement to have an FDA-registered establishment and you're handling things clean, sanitary. You have the traceability that you have and those requirements, even if you're not in a drug. And you have also the possibility of creating an investigational new drug or a new drug application if you're going to go for the full pharmaceutical. So Big Pharma's already done that with Epidiolex. They're going for these things. So if you're a small to medium-sized company and you can talk to your investors about those resources, it's going to be worthwhile for you to do that as the changes continue to come. So there's different avenues you can go, but there's requirements no matter what direction you have. So a lot of that information is out there available to you in FDA guidance requirements. So that's the good news. It's free for you to read and get. Now, where do you need help and work? You're going to have to decide that where you are with the company. But there's different ways you're going to go. But the FDA is going to make sure whether you're in food, cosmetics, or others to do it. Still can't do supplements until we get to where we can get more studies and approval. And still can't do pets and those things because the veterinary rules around those for pet products. So it's not ideal, but part of this process of opening things up is going to make changes. So those changes mean you have a product and you have different pathways you can go, but there's still requirements you need to think about from marketing to supply chain to running your establishment. And the good news is all that information's out there, but you do need to plan and have that strategy, to protect your company, to protect your clients, to protect yourself, protect your investors.
Yeah. So I'd be interested to get kind of a show of hands. How many people in the room are growers, cultivators? We've got a couple here. How many people are in retail and finished products? Okay. Anyone in processing and manufacturing? Excellent. So each one of those different areas of the industry all have a relationship with the FDA and the USDA, and there is a crossover. At what point does that crossover happen? Could y'all kind of expand upon a lot of the requirements that retailers require from different growers? Say you're growing basil, what the requirements are for good agricultural practices, and where that transition happens to moving into CGMP facilities to take your tomatoes and turn that into ketchup. What can people look for in the hemp industry, and where does that happen?
So my facility is sitting in Florida. Florida mandates now under USDA regulations in agriculture that you pull a feed master's permit, you pull a food handlers and processing permit, and that you do register with the FDA. So we have all of that, and aiming for that CGMP. It is a traceability, and this is where it gets really, really important. That plant is a natural remediator. It pulls everything out of the ground, and it cleans and cleans and cleans. Well, now it's going to end up in that plant material. The traceability from the point in time that it pulls out of the ground, that we have a certificate of analysis that gives us all the panels, the microbes, the pesticides, the potencies, to the next step, at which point it arrives at extraction. The methodology of extraction, also very important, because the agitation of that extraction can, in fact, change the composite, and generally does, of the molecular structure of that extract. A second test has to be pulled, certificate of analysis. At each step along the way, in that processing, it should be that you pull that analysis, because you have to maintain control from the point in time that you pluck that thing out of the ground to the point in time you put it in a bottle and put it into somebody. So general rule of practice is that you're tracing and have a traceability, which means that you have SOPs, documentation, that maintains and covers all of that. Because at the point in time that you call in an auditor and say, okay, I'm ready to go for these certifications, they're going to say, okay, show me the papers. Show us how you do it. And for us, it is intrinsic that we maintain that control and that quality control every step of the way, because at the point in time that it ends up on a shelf and it is not what we say it is, we're all in trouble.
Yeah, that's great advice from seeing operations and the work. My only thing to add from the USDA side is if you're defined organic, make sure you include what those standards and requirements are, and do your own internal audits, because you're going to be expected not to just do it, but manage it and maintain. So, organic doesn't necessarily mean no pesticides, pesticide-free, but you have to follow those rules. If you're going to make some of those decisions, to maintain that, but also manage what you have to do, that's perfectly understandable. But if you have a team of people, you have multiple places and work, things happen, people make decisions, things go off the range, so to speak, all right? So if that's the only other thing, is that everything that's in your operation, you're never going to set it and forget it. You should be auditing internally at least every 6 months, so you know where you're at. You're making changes so that when you're probably going to be audited. When I had 6 FDA facilities for a chemical or 483, that becomes public, and then you get put into, we're going to come back and see you a little more often. Because that's, they don't want, if you're higher risk or troublemakers, they're considering we don't want those operators. So I hope that's helpful. Make sure you're having, not just doing it, but you have an active management program, and you pull in the people and talent to do it. A lot of how to manage this is also freely available if you look for it, but you need to make sure it's being done. Because if you just set it and forget it and let it run on its own, I'm sure Jessica can talk about it. If you're not on top of it all the time, it gets away from you,
I'll
right?
give you the example. A couple of months ago, so it's common in this industry. Product happens all the time. And we didn't get tests for the original confection that we were working with. When we pulled the tests, our lead levels were off the charts, and we had used 4 different products. It's no joke, around the clock, 10 days to find where that lead was, and then to further identify whether or not a recall had to happen. By the grace of God, we didn't have to do a recall. But I'll tell you that the bill, at the end of the day, with the attorney, after 10 days, was $17,000. It's not cheap.
Yeah. I think a lot of people coming in, I'd also like to see a show of hands. How many people have been in business for more than 2 years? Boom. So a lot of new businesses. A lot of people get into the space thinking that I can just grow a product and I can sell a product, without taking into consideration what's required from retailers, what's necessary to get into wholesale distribution. What kind of traceability do you have to have? And I absolutely agree that the SOPs that exist and are available online really are the best practices. If you haven't considered what you're doing for your pest control, for your climate control, for a number of items that can impact your products negatively, it's something that you have to begin looking at. Only once you have your specific SOPs as it relates to all of these different points, and you're able to show that, or you could be able to really move your products into distribution. Next question I have is, there's a lot of unique issues facing the hemp industry as it relates to different levels of THC in in-process goods. Could you kind of talk about what the process looks like by the numbers when you take hemp flower and produce that into crude, and all of the middle processing that's necessary, and kind of where the gray area exists and what we should be pushing and promoting the FDA to begin addressing?
So the DEA ruling was basically to clarify the 2018 Farm Bill as it pertained to finished goods. The idea inside the industry and the rumbling was that if you're going to cripple an industry, the extraction is where you're going to cripple it. When you pull the plant, okay, let me back up. We had a phenomenon a couple of years ago called the smokable hemp market. Farmer went out to his field and he saw the top cola. That's where all the pretty buds are. And there was about a foot of it. And he looked out across his fields and he saw lots and lots of them. And he went, oh, you can smoke that like cannabis and we can sell it. And the next thing we knew, the market was flooded with this stuff. And every time it came across my desk and my team said, smokable hemp, I said, get me the certificate of analysis. And it came in at 0.5 THC, 0.6 THC, 0.7 THC, and I went, yep, get out of my office. Wait a minute, it's hemp. No, sir. It's cannabis. The differentiator between hemp and cannabis lies simply in that 0.3%. If it is 0.31, it's cannabis. That's the law. When you pull that plant material and then you go to dry it and cure, it's a live, living, active organism. It can make its own conversions and it can change up. And some molecules go, listen, I don't feel like being a CBG or a CBD. I'm going to go for THC today. I'm going to put that outfit on. True story. And then it goes hot. Then you put it through extraction and you can come up with it. Again, you've agitated it. Okay, you kind of made it a little angry, and now the molecules can convert again. This is why control is so important, because basically that language says that they could move in and take that product right out from under us at any point during that process, because it can elevate right over that 0.3. And at 0.31, now it becomes cannabis again. So that control has really become and been the focus in this industry. From that, we have seen some questionable products come out that I don't necessarily agree with, like that smokable hemp model. And it really comes down to best and safe practices. You have to be keenly aware of what that Farm Bill says and understand that language. And if you're not sure, there are, as he said, countless resources online, including my own website, which is purely educational. You won't find my store there. It is only for the purpose of your education and proper education. Because for us, we feel that the most important piece of all of this is that you know exactly what you're doing, what you're up against, and what the liabilities are. When you're working with a live molecule in that plant material, it is no different than him changing his clothes, her changing her shirt. It's living, and it changes. And the most important piece of that is control.
So, I really don't have anything to add, Jessica. When you start the living dynamics and changing of it, you have the starting material, you have the finished product, but you need to understand those issues of variation and what the lines are, and these are the rules of operation until they change. So follow them.
The most important piece of advice I can give you is test and pay for those third-party tests, because I can create a product over here with this oil that tested this way, mix it with these chemicals and these composites, and it can completely change the chemistry and change its potency, putting me at risk.
Yeah. To kind of expand upon this, can y'all talk a little bit about the impact of the USDA's interim final rule and the definition of total THC, and this new definition that expanded upon the statutory definition of 0.3 delta 9, and where the FDA is on that issue, and if we anticipate seeing similar language as it relates to total THC with the FDA?
Oh, if everyone at FDA wasn't waiting to get stuff to go forward, because you get an analytical test, and just that test itself, everything about asking, was this test done right? That can be a mess and a whole workshop in itself about, do I have the C of A? Is the C of A good? Who did the C of A? Did they do what they were supposed to do? Was the person running it having a bad day, or did they decide to quit and just jam the machine? There's all those things about that. So, the total definitions of, what it is before and the amount, that comes with, well, what's the whole, if I was FDA and others, it's like, well, what's the one protocol we all agree on that we're going to do and follow to measure that? And we're not there yet, okay? So we want to get there. But that's part of why, we're all saying, please let's get to a better place. And, things are going to happen next year one way or another, and that'll be in stages. But if you're dealing with this, the reality is, make sure you understand what a good test looks like and a good outcome and work. So if you have to defend it and you have somebody interpreting different rules or things, then okay, well, what's your definition of total THC, and what's your reference? Because if you come prepared to that audit with that reference and backing, then the other person just kind of asking the question and maybe having an opinion is going to back off. Like, I've dealt with this with auditors and things. It's like, well, what are you doing with this and there? I say, well, here's what the regulation requires. Backing other than they'd like to see it in a different way. So following good rules and things means that you're prepared for the best scenario and work. But yeah, there's these gray areas that we haven't fixed yet, and it drives everyone nuts, even the people on the regulatory side, because they're like, well, what happened with the market and the Farm Bill is basically all these great products happened, and basically CVS and Walgreens called FDA and said, we're going to stock this stuff. Are you going to stop us? And they went like that, right? And so, but they still have rules to employ, and you still have USDA saying, well, here's 0.3%. But then you don't have the safety and other things. So that's part of the regulatory space that you're able to operate in right now, which means you've had some great growth, and that's great. But it also means as we improve to make things better with regulatory, we're going to see, the rules applying, I think, as they should. Now, the great thing is there's great products that are helping people like Jessica and everyone else out here, and the people that are coming to you, and that's important because for a long, Epidiolex, if you don't have insurance, costs $30,000 a year. 36? Yeah. So if you have a child and their child has epilepsy and you're desperate, you need other options. So that's why this is all so important in the market. But it's also important that, you keep high standards and look for what's coming and how to manage it.
And thank you for that. And you're right, there is conflicting regulations. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing many times at the federal level and at the state level. So, even here in Texas, you have the Texas Department of Agriculture that introduced rules that were compliant and were in line with what the USDA put out, including total THC definition in that. Our Department of State Health Services, in their rules, have followed more in line with Texas statute and without any direction from the FDA, who has not made a statement or stance on whether or not it's the post-decarboxylated value of the plant. So the 2018 Farm Bill requires post-decarboxylation or similarly reliable methods for testing. And he's right. There hasn't been a hard and fast single piece of analytical equipment to set the standard of how we're going to test for all of these crops. There's some people that are in the camp of gas chromatography that takes that raw material, heats it up, decarboxylates it, changes the molecular or the molecule structure within that plant, and generally will produce higher levels of total THC in that. You also have HPLC testing, high performance liquid chromatography, which will give you two very distinctly different values for THCA and Delta-9. My biggest concern for the farming, and again, traceability to the end products, is the reality that, and I've tested thousands and thousands of plants all over the country, that those plants are over 0.3 total THC. Where I'd like to have clarity, and I think, if we see more enforcement from the USDA and local departments of agriculture, is ultimately a challenge to that USDA interim final rule. They're saying we had to do this. It says post-decarboxylation, but it also says other reliable methods. Fortunately, in Texas, HPLC is specifically outlined in the law, so it doesn't have this illusion that you have to decarboxylate those products. And so I'm encouraged in Texas, the DSHS for finished products still has that 0.3% designation for finished goods. And I believe New York has moved in that similar direction. Can you talk a little bit about, for our retailers in finished goods, what kind of labeling requirements they should be looking for, and what kind of registrations they should be pursuing to sell those products in the state?
Okay, so as I mentioned, we do private and white label. And I issue once a month to everybody that has come through my front door the state laws and then the global laws, because we have countries that are coming online now too. And it is state to state. Florida is a very interesting state. I moved to Florida a year ago from Colorado. Colorado's really where I started all of this, where I've been for the last 12 years. Florida, effective last year, said that in order for you to operate in this space, you had to pull a permit, you had to register with the FDA, and you had to operate as though you were any other manufacturer in any other space. And so we set about doing that. We have that same requirement or regulation now coming for 2021 for Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York. We have to register the products. The state comes out and does inspections, and they do spot inspections. And then they run around all the retailers, because the retailers have to carry a permit now in order to cover the product and carry the product in the store. If you walk through the front door of that store and they find a product on that shelf that is not permitted, you're subject to a fine. If you yourself are the manufacturer and you're on that shelf, you're subject to a fine. They come back a couple weeks later, same deal, the fine gets bigger. Obviously, now Florida's going, cha-ching, let's make some money. Awesome, I'm all for it. The labeling requirements for the state of Florida are also key, because they map to the letter of the law of the FDA label requirements. As he said, you cannot use the word supplement. You use the word supplement, whoo, you're done. You have to have a QR code. So if you're in Florida and you march up to CVS, which I did, and this was a very interesting thing I did last week, but there's all these great brands and they've got huge marketing behind them and everybody knows these brands. And I started in one QR code after the next, because I am on my team every single day checking my QR codes to make sure every single one traces directly to a certificate of analysis. And here is why. Mrs. So-and-so gives that product to her child and her child goes into anaphylactic shock. She's got to be able to open up that COA right now, see what's in it, to get the answers for why your kid is sick. And a lot of these products went, you know what, here's what we're going to do. Of the 12 products I found sitting on that shelf, those QR codes didn't work for 10, and for 2, you had to go to that site. Tiny, okay? How much time does Mrs. So-and-so have to get that information before the EMT is dragging that child out of the room? So the label requirements, a QR code that goes straight to the certificate of analysis. And when you get that certificate of analysis, I'm going to go back to the last conversation. Please pick up the phone and verify. Because I can't tell you, after 6.5 years in this industry, how often those COAs are adulterated. Photoshop is a beautiful thing, apparently. So you pick up the phone and you call. Over the course of the years, 4 out of 7 calls, nope, I didn't give that test. Those weren't the results. Or, if you look closely, the test is outdated by 2 years. So, you have to for the total weight. You have to give the information for the milligrams. You have to give the information, most importantly, traceability back to you or the manufacturer. You better be able to get a hold of somebody right now. We live in a world that is extremely litigious and anxious, and any place where we fail the public, you've given the public an open door policy to come get you and take you and eat you alive and leave you penniless the next day, all because you had this great intention, but you missed the letter of the law. I have with me examples of what those labels should look like. They're also available everywhere online. If you go to the Florida USDA website, you can find that information there. Make no mistake about it, this is going to be the requirement nationally. Mm-hmm. Florida is a great blueprint.
Yeah, just to add some thoughts around that, part of CGMP requirements are a good recall plan that helps you build good traceability for batch and lot numbers, and then also for your products having a good, whether you use a contractor or poison control center, but having that number, and also call-ins for if somebody has an adverse effect that you're reporting it, but have a system for it. But really relevant to these products from the toxicology background I have are the terpenes. So D-limonene, known, classified, sensitizer to skin and others. So, if you think about that scenario, if you've got a big tub of butter and somebody's got their kid and they think, oh, pudding or whatever, and get it all over and things, the skin sensitization or maybe ingestion and respiratory, it can happen. Now, hopefully you've got a control on your terpenes, you know what they are, you know what they're low, you're keeping it, but that's part of the reality of the test that FDA wants and where we want to go, because for something to be a cosmetic and to go through things, sensitization is part of that test. If you're going to have an OTC monograph and it goes on the skin, that's something that you're going to try and manage and do well. So hopefully if you've got a good supply chain, you understand that terpene amount, but that goes back to the test. If you have a variable supply chain, if you're dealing with global markets and something overseas and you're dealing with that stuff, you have a call, what was this? Oh, did your supplier decide to switch on you and you didn't know about it or things? That's going to be the things you're going to go back to. If you get that call that someone says, my kid's gone into shock because they had your product, you want to be able to fix that or understand that. But that's why you want to go to all that work and set it up, have your team members so that, and you run that drill. So you say, okay, something's happened. What do we do? All right, we call that. We pull what the batch and lot is. We get this done within a day or two, because your fast response is important, because you want to act faster than when they call the police or they call the TV station. That's you're beating that clock for so and so kid. I had this and they got sick, and I need to tell everyone with that. If you can tell them and say, okay, we had that, we're sorry, we're going to get you to the hospital, take care of whatever. You need, that's where that recall and that traceability and response time is so critical, because that can make or break your business with, there's people that make their living and all they do is just go after little things like that. They look at them in reports, et cetera.
Yes, ma'am, please.
I'm going to add to that, and I'm going to give you a real and true scenario. I got a phone call from somebody who had gotten their oil supply from an unknown, and they wanted us to fabricate with it. And we are organic, and I didn't want to bring it into the house, but we went, you know what, just this one time. So we did. And I looked at the certificate of analysis, and at the front side of it, everything checked out and looked great. So we did the product, and we did 1,500 units of this product. And then somebody called and said, I feel stoned. and it's only your product I'm taking. And I went, that's not possible. And my pride filled up because I have control. Nope. I got an adulterated COA, and it was really, really good. I mean, this is why I pick up the phone and call now with every single one, because it was absolutely infallible. And the test came back at 0.8 THC. And there were 1,500 of these sitting on a shelf ready to go out. That liability right there is enough to kill your business, and that's called drug trafficking.
Yeah. Well, and another thing, where traceability and recall really became real to me is in times past, I ran a greenhouse. We sold basil and greens, lettuce, into distribution with Whole Foods, Wegmans in the Northeast. You also need to recognize the liabilities that exist with your employees and different claims that can be made from folks inside that are upset with things that were going on. Fortunately, I had my good agricultural practices. I had all my SOPs in place, which were requirements from all of the stores that I worked with. So that when my employee called all of my customers and said that everything's tainted with E. coli, you're able to provide those tests. They wanted 2 more tests after that for consecutive weeks, though. And it did ultimately damage that company tremendously. Having regularity in your testing and having that information as a part of your internal protection and protecting yourself from liability, both from within and without, is huge. One thing I did want people to understand from a retail standpoint is if you're selling retail finished products, you do have to register with the Department of State Health Services. They require a criminal background check, FBI fingerprinting to be done. If you own multiple locations, you only have to do that once. So HEB only needs to do one of those for all of its different stores. If you are a processor in the state, you are required to get a processor's license through the Department of State Health Services, which will also require a lot of local permitting. So your local health authorities, which are kind of the hands and feet of that state organization, will come in and do audits to look at the food safety of your preparations in your facilities. So you have your hand washing stations, you have your exits properly marked, and the doors have to be open during business hours, and particular types of materials for your floors, for your walls, ventilation. Fortunately, again, I don't want people to be overwhelmed by all of those things because it is very clearly written out. If you think about it and kind of calm your mind, it's all very practical, straightforward things, but they do need to be addressed. We are getting close to the end. I did want to open up for any questions, and if you do have questions, I have a microphone, or yes, this gentleman has the microphone. Please ask that question there so that we're able to get it onto the recording. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Carlos Romero. I would like to know what you foresee the future. Is it 1% THC like South America? Are we still going to be fighting in that role that you just spoke of? Are we in the 0.3 or not? Because Europe right now has a very dispute on that, and in South America we're just waiting to see what's going on, because we can live with 1%. And actually we have the same problems that if we lived in 0.3%.
So when the world gets past the restrictions on doing clinical trials and et cetera that the DEA List 1 has for THC, when we get past that world, and a clinical trial can be done to say, here's 0.3, here's 0.5, here's 1%. When we can do those things and then have people say, here's the data. I think when FDA has that, then they'll say, here's where a line can be drawn And if we're dealing with recreationally versus therapeutic, then what those levels are. But, that's going to come back to being able to do the science to come around it. Just like, what did it take to get, what is it taking to get a COVID vaccine approved? Well, are we going to harm more people with the side effects from that vaccine versus the actual benefit? The same kind of question is going to be asked with, are you going to heal someone with those levels? So, if there's, and if there's studies that have been done in South America or others where, it's like Uruguay, totally open, it'd be interesting to see what they've done, and hopefully we can build. But I think the answer is being able to do the science, and we haven't been able to do the science yet because, we just have a crazy system. But I think it's going to open up. Is it going to be as fast as you want? Probably not. But, is it going to, answer the questions that any drug would want? You're talking about what you want to bring into your home, and you trust when you look at the back of a label or that you buy something from the pharmacist that you're not going to have something that's going to harm you or make you have a bad day because someone sold a product that wasn't, didn't have the right product stewardship. So it's going to come, and maybe we'll have a different number, but it's going to take a lot of the science work and FDA to look at it.
I think the answer falls in a similar vein to the spirits industry. And the question becomes, at what point is the consumer intoxicated? And that's really where the THC level and the question comes in. And I will give you real and true experience. My husband is 6'1". He weighs 285 pounds, and his wingspan, shoulder to shoulder, is 58 inches. He's an enormous human being. His bones are this big. You give him full spectrum at that 0.3%, we get nothing done. He's stoned. He is loopy and stoned. Me, I'm like, okay, well, can we get 6,000 more milligrams? The other interesting study and phenomenon that I have been deeply in for the last 30 days, I don't have a gallbladder. I can eat edibles. I feel nothing. One day I say to a doctor friend of mine, how come he eats edibles and I feel nothing and he's stoned out of his mind? And she said, got a gallbladder? No. And she said, we're doing a study. People that don't have a gallbladder don't process the edible. They don't get high. Wait, what? These are the moving parts. If we don't know what the level of intoxication is, because your endocannabinoid system is deficient differently than his endocannabinoid system is deficient as mine, and let me tell you, I am a medical consumer. I consume roughly 0.5 gram every evening for medicinal purposes. If my husband consumed that, the walls would be talking to him. And he'd be out of his mind, okay, waiting to come down. And I function normally no pain. There's no way to know right now what that level of intoxication is. Now, you hand that person the keys to a car. I believe that is what holds all of this up. And the safety number at that 0.3% speaks to, well, we're going to guess and hope, I think, at the initiate, that that's not an intoxicant level by comparison to that 1%, which could, for somebody like my husband, be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And just on the forensic toxicology side where I work on, we, as a scientific community, we don't have a shared understanding of what is a 0.08 BAC equivalent for THC. And it's never going to be straightforward like that because alcohol's zero-order kinetics is very different than, whether someone's an occasional user or habitual. Now, if somebody's overconsumed something that has a high content or 2 blunts, they probably shouldn't be behind the wheel. But are they high? And how do we enforce policy around that? We're not there yet, and part of it's because we haven't been able to do the science. So
yeah, well, and if I could add to that, the statute says 0.3 delta 9 THC. It does talk about decarboxylation or other similarly reliable methods. Probably the most progressive policy around hemp is in Switzerland that did set that 1%. I believe a number of countries in South America at 1%. But the compromise that we as the Texas Hemp Industries Association and National Hemp Association would like to see is 1% total THC, because at 1% total THC, you'll, in almost all cases, be below 0.3 delta 9 THC. So you're statutorily compliant, but you've also addressed the reality that exists in a vast majority of high CBD producing plants that are generally between 0.4 and 1% total THC. It also addresses plants that are 0.3% or less delta 9 but are 20% THCA, because when you decarboxylate that, you're going to get pretty stoned. It's a question that I saw initially brought up by genetics company who brought that exact argument. Said, 30% of the marijuana varieties in Oregon are compliant to the 0.3 delta 9 standpoint. And so upper limits of total THC I think are totally reasonable or within the spirit of what was passed with that 2018 Farm Bill. We have meetings this last week with Senator Rand Paul, who is really pushing and promoting the MORE Act to be taken up in the Senate. There's actually been some rumblings around McConnell actually taking up that bill in the Senate. In its current form, probably not, but there's some wrangling happening. And then also within that, providing a provision to put it at 1% total THC. So there's some move there. Where it is at the moment is very restrictive. When we talk restrictive, I believe over 40% of all the crops in Arizona last year were burned because they went over the 0.3 total THC designation. How long will people bear that? Fortunately, in Texas, I think our Department of Agriculture has heeded the reality and the facts. And there's great studies that have been done by Chris Hadula with Praverde Labs. A great article was put out by Rod Kite with Kite on Cannabis, showing a graph of what the results are for tests where you're just looking at delta 9, how many of those crops are hot or above that limit. Vast majority of them are not. Very few outliers are above 0.3 delta 9. When you look at total THC, and it's very clear in that scatter graph that as you approach around 6% CBD, you're going to be at that 0.3 total THC. That is so damaging to the farmers that have to produce really around 10% plus CBD in order to have a valuable crop that processors will purchase and can efficiently process. The last bit, and my hope with the FDA, is that we move towards a process very similar to what you would see with fish oil, where you take a raw-based material that prior to distillation is compliant, but post-distillation you have higher levels of contaminants like mercury. That we have language that allows for remediation that the FDA does for a number of different products, and the denaturing or disposal of those products. We want ultimately to be treated similarly to other products. We want safety to be at the absolute forefront, and it has to be the focus of everyone all the time. Like ultimately, that's the reason why we're doing these things. But the industry does certainly face unique challenges that hopefully we have some clarity on. Do we have some other questions? Yes, ma'am. Mike.
If I sell final product online only, how I match all different regulations from different states?
So
from labeling perspective.
What was the question?
So if she is selling online, how is she compliant state to state that have different labeling requirements?
Okay, so most importantly, first and foremost, South Dakota, Idaho, Iowa, Nebraska. You need a disclaimer that pops up that tells that user it's against the law in that state to have the product. That is key. If you don't have a disclaimer for those states, put one in. You are compliant, I want to say in 45 states right now. What was the rest of the question?
Just what should she be putting on her label to give her the grace ability to sell online to different states?
You want that label to, and I can show you an example, but you want that label to look like every other label that you see on a store shelf. You want it to have a barcode. You want it to have a QR code that traces back to the certificate of analysis. You want it to have your dietary facts. You want it to have the THC disclaimer statement. This product does not have more than 0.3% THC per blah, blah, blah. It needs to have the weight and total volume for the container or the vessel that it is sitting in. I believe you want the pregnancy, if you're pregnant or nursing, in some states, not all. And then your ingredients list. It's universal.
And that's a pretty universal, another disclaimer, this product has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug
That's the most
Administration
important one. Yes, sorry.
to treat or cure anything.
Yep.
One thing in all marketing materials, and I'm still shocked by how many websites that I see, you cannot use the word cure. Do not put the word cancer on your website either. There's nothing more the FDA loves than taking out
Claims.
folks around claims. Another thing is the font size. Go and look up what font size you need to use on those dietary facts and what particular font type to be used. There are some that are approved, some that aren't. You're going to have different requirements for how big your front label has to be versus your dietary facts, spacing, the margins on your label. It's all outlined on the FDA website. It is pretty standardized across the board, but to be candid, and as someone who white labels different products, there's nothing I love more than to go to a potential customer who's carrying a product that doesn't have a compliant label. I said, you can't sell this, so you have to buy this from me, and know that your competition is doing the same thing of you all the time. So you want to make sure that have that in the right way. Any other questions? All right, well, I think we're going to finish up. It looks like we're going to have the next round of speakers in here in a bit, but thank you all so much to our moderators.
You're the moderator.